Welcome to Belly Button Window, the window into the world of Jimi Hendrix, where we revisit the stories, key people, important events, chart the growth of his music, his life and ideas, and plenty of juicy stories in between. Episode 2, London, the first 2 weeks arriving at Heathrow. On a Saturday morning, September 24th, 1966, precisely at 9 a.m. and almost age 24, Jimi disembarked from his luxurious Pan Am flight onto the tarmac at Heathrow Airport in London. Clutching his guitar case, he carried his sole possessions, a Fender Stratocaster, a spare set of clothes, and a jar of Valderma cream for his face. Upon arrival, the British immigration officials initially rejected Hendrix's request for a work permit. However, Chandler passionately advocated on his behalf, emphasizing his stature as a respected American recording artist. The immigration officials, with a hint of suspicion, observed Hendrix's compact carry-on bag, which seemed to hold all of his belongings. After considerable deliberation, the authorities reluctantly relented and granted Hendrix a 7-day non-work permit, sparing Chandler the frustration of sending him back without setting foot outside the airport. During the flight, Hendrix expressed his concern that British musicians might not be as receptive to his music as Chandler had been. To alleviate his apprehensions, Chandler decided to make an unannounced visit to Zoot Money, a musician and longtime friend, whose flat was conveniently located between the airport and central London. Shortly before 11 a.m., they reached Money's flat, where they were warmly welcomed, just as Chandler had anticipated. At Money's insistence, Hendrix spontaneously jammed with members of his big roll band, playing one of Zoot's white Telecasters, and which included a young Andy Summers, later a member of the Police. They passionately reworked blues classics and recent soul hits for nearly 3 hours, leaving everyone involved astonished. As they continued their journey toward London, Chandler sensed the relief emanating from Hendrix. Being readily accepted by Money and his band lifted a tremendous weight off Jimi's shoulders. Now, he could fully focus his energy on pursuing his dream. Reflecting on his first impression of Jimi, Zoot would later go on to say, "When I heard him play, it was evident that he had absorbed all forms of blues and black music. He possessed the ability to play various styles, be it blues, gospel, or whatever you want to call it." The London rock scene. In the late of 1966, the London rock scene had its well-established hierarchies. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones reigned as the big boys of the industry. Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck were celebrated as the guitar heroes, while The Who dazzled audiences with their electrifying and spectacular stage performances. While amongst the drummers, Ginger Baker of Cream and The Who's Keith Moon held the top positions. Cream, Eric Clapton's newly formed band, with Ginger Baker on drums and Jack Bruce on bass and vocals, emerged as the most fashionable and talked-about new group. And so, with Jimi under his wing, Chandler's strategy was to showcase him everywhere like a debutante being introduced to high society. Hendrix spent the following weeks making the rounds in London, in each and every way, from dropping into a Who recording session to introduce him to the band, to attending numerous club performances to witness other musicians in action, which led to Chandler's ultimate audacious move, jamming with Eric Clapton himself during a Cream gig. It's important to understand that, at that time, Clapton was regarded as nothing short of a musical deity, often referred to as God. No one dared to challenge his supremacy. Kathy Etchingham. Jimi's first English girlfriend. Kathy Etchingham recounts the story as follows. When Chas Chandler arrived with his new discovery, Jimi Hendrix, they stopped by to see Zoot and Ronnie Money on their way to the hotel. I, however, was fast asleep, unaware of the jam session they had with Andy Summers. In the morning, Ronnie came to wake me, thinking I'd enjoy what was happening downstairs. But I was exhausted from the night before. Ronnie persisted, trying to shake me awake, urging me to come downstairs and meet this wild-looking man that Chas had brought along. Sleepily, I wondered what could be so special about another visitor when there were always people dropping in. Ronnie explained that the visitor was Jimi Hendrix, a guitarist Chas had found working in a New York club, and that Chas would be managing him. Despite my drowsiness, I agreed to meet Jimi later. By the time I woke up and descended downstairs, Chas and Jimi had already left, but Ronnie assured me that we would all meet later at the Scotch. The Scotch of St. James Club, situated in London's West End, had become a regular hangout for me and my circle, representing the last vestiges of swinging London from its heyday in 1964. That evening, When Zoot, Ronnie, a friend and I walked into the club, there was an extraordinary stillness in the atmosphere. Everyone was attentively listening to someone playing the guitar in the corner. Usually people would jam at the scotch, but this time the whole place seemed captivated. As my eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, I realized that Chaz was asking the guitarist, whom I couldn't see clearly, to stop playing. We made our way to Chaz's table, and there he introduced me to his new American discovery, the wild man Ronnie had mentioned earlier. After some general conversation, Jimmy invited me to sit closer to him to talk more intimately. He told me something that might have sounded like a cliché, but the way he said it made it sweet and innocent. I immediately liked him and tried to maintain casual conversation, despite feeling flattered by his compliments. Later on, when the dark-haired girl returned from the restroom, she took my previous seat next to Ronnie. I didn't pay much attention, assuming she couldn't be Jimmy's girlfriend if he was flirting with me. However, a heated altercation erupted between Ronnie and the girl, resulting in a violent outburst and prompting Chaz to rush Jimmy out of the club due to his visa limitations. In a taxi back to Hyde Park Towers, Jimmy seemed perplexed and shocked by the whole incident. I asked about the glamorous girl, and he revealed she was Keith Richards' girlfriend, someone he had met in New York. Back at the hotel, we shared some drinks, and Jimmy's charm, humor, and self-effacing nature endeared him to everyone. He was unlike anyone I had ever met, and our conversation extended for hours. I found myself drawn to him, not just as a friend but also as a lover. That night with Jimmy was a revelation. He was more sexually experienced and imaginative than anyone I had been with before. With him, sex became something more profound than just a passing pastime. I wanted him to be not only my friend but also my lover. He was a completely different kind of connection. NOEL REDDING auditions. On the 29th of September 1966, approaching his 21st birthday, NOEL Redding made the journey from his hometown of Folkestone on the Kent coast with a heavy heart. Feeling dispirited and on the verge of giving up on music altogether, he contemplated becoming a milkman as a last resort. It seemed like his final shot at pursuing his musical dreams. NOEL had been a professional musician since 1962, touring with the Lonely Ones and the Loving Kind, supporting major pop bands like the Hollies, the Beatles, and Manfred Mann. He had earned his stripes traveling all over Britain and navigating the challenging club circuit in Hamburg. The Loving Kind released 3 singles that didn't find success, and their hard work yielded little reward. After a discouraging talk from manager Gordon Mills about his seemingly bleak future, NOEL decided to leave the band. His audition journey took him to the Birdland Club, where he encountered Chaz, who was assisting Eric Burdon in assembling a new band. NOEL, with a hairstyle reminiscent of Jimmy's, asked to join the Animals, but the spot had already been taken. However, Chaz had another option. An American guitarist was looking for a bass player, and NOEL was willing to do anything, even with a limited budget. Chaz asked NOEL to return the next day, providing him with 5 shillings for his fare. Upon returning home, NOEL excitedly shared the news with his mother, Margaret, saying, "I met a guitarist who's going to be the greatest guitar player ever, and I think I'm going to join the group." The following day, NOEL headed back to the Birdland, only to find nobody there. Undeterred, he decided to visit Anim, Mike Jeffrey's office on Gerrard Street. There, Mike offered NOEL the bass playing position, and a few days later, Jimmy confirmed the decision with a phone call from Chaz. NOEL was content to transition to bass, recognizing that in a band with Jimi Hendrix, no one else would be playing lead guitar. Jimmy had a clear vision of what he wanted from a bass player, knowing precisely the sound, feel, and pulse he desired. Having a novice bassist like NOEL was advantageous, as it meant he had no preconceived notions about the instrument. Moreover, Jimmy appreciated NOEL's curly afro hairstyle, as it signified a touch of individualism that resonated with him. All in all, NOEL's arrival at the right place and time, with the right face and attitude, set the stage for their musical journey together. This is how NOEL recounts the story. Chaz introduced me, Jimmy his name was, and he seemed quite pleasant and friendly. He also introduced me to drummer Ainsley Dunbar and pianist, Vox Continental, Mike O'Neill Nero of the Gladiators. Meeting Nero was the highlight of that day for me. Jimmy mumbled the chords of a song called Hey Joe, and we ran through it 2 or 3 times, before briefly trying a couple of sequences in the vein of Have Mercy. No one sang. It didn't seem like much of an audition. No talking, just this American guy playing nothing particularly special, and the feeling that someone was planning a group. We finished up and Jimmy came over and said, "Can I have a chat with you?" I made my favorite suggestion that we nip next door for a half of bitter. He hadn't tasted bitter yet, and found it strong compared to American beer. We chatted about nothing and about music. I wanted to know if he had ever seen Booker T or Sam Cooke. He had. That improved him a lot in my estimation. Jimmy commented on my hair, which had begun to grow even though it was curly like his own, and therefore not trendy. I told him his hair was a bit longer than my image of an American, which was based on the GI, short back, sides and top. He said, "I must be groovy to have hair like that." And as we walked back, he asked if I would come up to the audition room again the next day, as he hoped I'd be in a new group with him. Chaz then asked me to come back. I said I could if he'd give me 10 shillings for the train fare. Jimmy meets Mitch. Following Jimmy's arrival in London, Chandler wasted no time introducing him to fellow musicians, taking him to various clubs, and arranging opportunities for him to showcase his talent. The formation of the experience began to take shape, with NOEL Redding securing the bassist position despite having never played bass before, having impressed everyone in just 2 auditions. However, finding the right drummer proved to be more challenging. Among the several drummers auditioned, one stood out, John "Mitch" Mitchell, who had recently departed from the soul-influenced Georgie fame and the Blue Flames, perhaps sooner than he had initially intended. Mitch, a native Londoner, had already accumulated a wealth of showbiz experience by the age of 20. At a young age, his parents recognized his entertaining talent and enrolled him in a theatrical school, leading him to appear in radio plays and sing jingles for advertisements. By the time he reached his 12th birthday, he had gained some modest fame as a beloved character in the BBC TV children's series Jennings. However, music had taken hold of Mitch's heart, and he had developed a strong passion for the drums. Through his work in advertising, he had the chance to connect with musicians and recording studios, further fueling his love for music. By the age of 14, his dedication to music surpassed his interest in acting. Mitch secured a job at Jim Marshall's renowned Hanwell guitar shop of Marshall amp fame, where he interacted with various musicians and started landing gigs. As he gained experience, he played with local bands like Pete Nelson and the Travelers, featuring notable musicians like Vic Briggs, who later joined Eric Burdon and the Animals. His first taste of foreign touring came with the Coronets, who took him to Germany, and he even ventured into session work, collaborating with Ray Davies of the Kinks. With a promising background in music and an evident affinity for the drums, Mitch would soon prove to be an essential piece of the Jimi Hendrix experience puzzle, contributing his remarkable talent to their iconic sound. Walking the streets of London. Kathy Etchingham recounts how, during those early days, we had leisurely afternoons with time to spare, and Jimmy loved nothing more than strolling through the city, taking in the sights like an awestruck tourist. The old buildings fascinated him, with their intricate gargoyles, statues, and ornate decorations that adorned the streets of London. To him, London was an enchanting wonderland, unlike anything he had ever seen before. I became his guide, showing him the iconic landmarks and taking him to vibrant places like Portobello Road and the King's Road. As we explored, we indulged in small treasures, exchanging jewelry and silk scarves as tokens of our affection. Jimmy had a penchant for bright colors and luxurious fabrics like silk, chiffons and velvets. I remember he had a fondness for those belted Burberry-style raincoats that seemed to be a favorite among American travelers, although it didn't quite match his wild, untamed hair. Back then, despite Chaz starting to secure him some media coverage, Jimmy wasn't widely recognized. We could roam freely and go about our daily activities without much interruption. If we caught anyone's eye, it was because of Jimmy's unique fashion sense, not because he was a renowned musician. Those moments we spent exploring the streets of London, immersed in the city's charm and culture, remain etched in my memory. It was a time of simplicity and anonymity before the whirlwind of fame swept us up and changed our lives forever. Jimmy's jams with cream. Chaz recalls, late in September, before we had even had rehearsal, I bumped into Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton down at the Cromwellian Club. They had recently formed Cream and asked what I was doing, because news was out by then that the Animals had broken up, so I told them about Hendrix. They said, "Why don't you bring him to the Regent Polytech on Saturday, the 1st of October for a jam?" I told them that this wouldn't be fair. "You're mates of mine," I said. "You can't let me do this to you. This guy is really extraordinary." They said if he was that good I had to bring him. Under Chaz's guidance, we had the incredible opportunity to attend one of Cream's early concerts at the London Polytechnic, a room resembling a school hall, brimming with students who stood shoulder to shoulder, displaying a level of politeness and attentiveness reminiscent of a jazz club crowd. Standing to the left of the stage amidst the audience, we witnessed a break between numbers, during which Chaz ventured up on stage. With his commanding presence, Chaz managed to catch Eric Clapton's attention and inquired if Jimmy could join them in a jam. Ginger Baker expressed some objections, reluctant to share the spotlight with an unknown artist. However, Eric agreed and skillfully pacified Ginger's concerns. Chaz explains, "When we got there, Ginger was a bit uptight, but he was an old pal of mine. We had known each other at that stage for 10 or 11 years. And backstage he said that Hendrix could jam with them if Clapton stayed on stage. He wanted this because if Eric stayed on stage and it all went wrong, he could pull it out." Eric offered Jimmy his guitar, but Jimmy declined, revealing that he had brought his own instrument, which I happened to be carrying for some reason. Taking the guitar from me, he gracefully ascended the stage. A brief moment was spent fiddling with the plug, and then he launched into Killing Floor, a timeless blues standard. Clapton stood there and his hands dropped off his guitar, recalled Chandler. In those early days, Jimmy's playing was flawless, fueled by his freshness, eagerness to prove himself, and complete sobriety. The entire student audience stood stunned, captivated by the mesmerizing sounds emanating from his guitar. I recall Jeff Beck being quoted as saying he contemplated giving up music altogether upon hearing Jimmy play for the first time. Jimmy was undeniably the finest rock guitarist in the world. Eric nearly fainted, Chaz later revealed to us. He said, "Give us a cigarette, man. Is he really this good, or can he only do that one piece?" When I assured him that Jimmy was the real deal, Eric could only exclaim, "Oh my God!" He had only heard 10 bars at the most. Within a week he had his hair frizzed, and would come by our flat any time he had a spare moment, to be with Hendrix. Considering the circumstances, he had no band and no original material. Hendrix couldn't have wished for a better introduction to the small, close-knit London music scene. Mitchell wins the coin toss. There were 2 drummers in contention, Terry McVeigh recalls, Mitch Mitchell and Ainsley Dunbar. NOEL Redding recalled, "Chaz introduced us to this guy, Mitch, who had recently left Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames. We rehearsed for a few days, working on songs like Have Mercy, Johnny Be Good, If You Need Somebody to Love, and Hey Joe, old classics." The 29th of September was a turning point. One night, Hendrix and I went to a club called Blazes, and Jimmy joined Brian Auger on stage for a jam session, recounts Chandler. While Jimmy was performing, Chandler engaged in a conversation with Johnny Halliday, striking a deal for Jimmy to support Halliday on his French tour in 5 years. So that night, Jimmy and I went back to the apartment and flipped a coin to decide who would be the drummer, Dunbar or Mitchell, Chandler explains. We couldn't make up our minds. Rehearsals had to start soon as the tour was only 10 days away. Luckily, Mitch won the toss. The next morning we called him and immediately began rehearsals to prepare for the Johnny Halliday tour. Mitchell played it safe during the auditions, says Chandler. He didn't reveal everything he was capable of, but as soon as we told him the job was his, he started to shine. At that moment, we decided we didn't need any other musicians. The sound was clean, exciting, and fresh. We said, "To hell with it, we don't need anyone else right now." We had discussed all the options, but it simply fell into place. There was no grand plan. Nobody wanted to sing. The main, or rather huge, problem was that nobody wanted to sing, not even at rehearsals. Even though Jimmy had been singing in New York, he was still nervous about being in England and got terribly embarrassed about singing. Noel had a squeak, not a voice, while Mitch's voice was more trained and relaxed because of his stage schooling. But it wasn't what was needed, and besides, drummers weren't expected to sing. Noel put it this way: our first gigs were virtually instrumentals, with extremely minimal mumbles. Finally, we broke down Jimmy's shyness and persuaded him to sing. His voice had good bass fullness in it, and his American accent would certainly catch the English ear. At first, he would crank his guitar up really loud to cover his singing, but gradually he gained confidence and found the right balance between voice and guitar. He was very pleased and relieved that we could do it, and so were we. Selecting a name. Now that Mitchell and Redding had joined the band, Chandler and Hendrix set out to find a fitting name for their newly formed trio. Chaz wasn't impressed with Hendrix's previous name, Jimmy James and the Blue Flames, and wanted a fresh start. He didn't want the name to pigeonhole the group into a specific musical style. The Blue Flames tag felt too rooted in traditional blues, and with Mitch recently departing Georgie fame's Blue Flames, British fans were likely to be confused by the two distinct groups, at least in the beginning. After some gentle persuasion, Hendrix agreed to let go of Jimmy James and embrace his given name, albeit with a slight alteration in the spelling to Jimi. "We racked our brains trying to come up with a name for the band," Chandler recalls. "It was he who came up with Experience." Initially, Hendrix had reservations, but Chandler was certain that it perfectly captured the essence of the artist. And so the plan unfolds. Working from the apartment, Jimmy would share with Chaz and his wife Lotta. Chandler and Hendrix plotted their next moves. With Chaz burning to record Tim Rose's Hey Joe, and with a newly formed group in place, Hendrix would need a recording contract. Enter Michael Jeffrey, Chandler's own manager during his tenure with the Animals, and now his partner. Chaz's view was, "I knew what I wanted to do, and that was to produce Hendrix. I knew very little about the business, only what I thought should be done with an artist. But when it came to negotiating contracts, I thought, well, Jeffrey can do that, and I'll do this." Noel said trust was everything for us. It was the 11th of October, and contract time. We all felt embarrassed and shy about money. Surely it would be impolite to ask questions, even if you understood enough of the foreign language called legalese to be able to think of one, or even appear to scrutinize the contract. It would be like saying, "I don't trust you." Trust was everything for us. I knew they could trust me, and they were famous, respected professionals. What could go wrong? We knew about groups. You played, you hopefully earned money, and you shared the profits. What else could a contract say? In silence, we listened to a quick rundown, hearing only that we'd be making records and getting money. The contract. As Noel explains, in our naivety, we failed to grasp the extent of the binding agreement we were entering into. The essence of the 7-year contract, with a 6-month option and a 5-year extension available to the producers, was as follows. The three of us, collectively known as the Jimi Hendrix Experience, signed on as exclusive artists to Jeffrey and Chandler, producers who sought to create and exploit sound recordings while enhancing and promoting our professional reputations. As artists, we agreed to compose and perform songs together, showcasing our skills, with a minimum commitment of 10 single sides per year, and potentially more at the discretion of the producers, and fewer only in cases of government or force majeure. If any member were to leave the group, they would relinquish the use of the name but remain under contract, requiring any future collaborators to also sign on. We were not allowed to record for other entities without permission, duplicate the same material for anyone else within a 5-year period, grant rights or licenses to others, or engage in any activities that could hinder our fulfillment of the agreement. We granted Jeffrey and Chandler worldwide rights to all copyrights, songs, and performance rights, radio, TV, film, of the recorded material, as well as the right to use our names, biographies, and any other information deemed useful for selling records, and the ability to assign our rights to third parties. Furthermore, we agreed not to be convicted of any criminal offenses, exhibit improper behavior in public, or fall ill. We also assumed the responsibility to indemnify the producers against any breaches of contract resulting from their assignment of rights to a third party, as well as any lawsuits under UK law. We granted them power of attorney, conferring the authority to sign on our behalf for any matter, including checks, regardless of whether we had reviewed them or not, throughout the duration of the agreement. In return, the producers committed to organizing recordings, covering all incurred costs, including royalties, and making earnest efforts to promote our records. Following the termination of the contract, they retained the right to sell remaining stock of our records during a designated sell-off period for 5 years. Upon timely notification, the masters would either be destroyed or handed over to us, subject to reimbursement of the producer's unspecified costs. As for compensation, the artists were entitled to a commission of 2.5%, 2.5%, of the net retail price of our recordings, calculated on 90%. This percentage decreased to 1.25%, 1.25%, for tapes, one-sided records, and sales outside the UK, US, Canada, and Benelux. For records sold through record clubs, half of these amounts would be paid, and 1/4 if the records were given away to entice the public to join a record club. In some cases, the group's share could be as low as 0.31%. Our percentage was set to double after 2 years. The producers were obligated to provide us with accounting statements twice yearly, within 3 months of the end of June and December, with the first accounting due before April 1967.